Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. It used to be quite traditional. Usually the new thing for the wedding was the wedding dress. The blue was usually something that you couldn't really see, a garter or a small piece of jewelry. But since 2008, a lot of brides have opted for another option for this something new, something blue aspect. And you probably already know it. It's the famous Hangisi shoe, the stiletto shoe designed by Manolo Blahnik. How did a shoe become a wedding or bridal accessory? Also, this is nothing that I need to explain to you. You have probably seen Sex and the City, where Mr. Big finally sealed the deal with Carrie Bradshaw, and he kind of proposed using this shoe in their walk-in closet. While most people associate Manolo Blahnik with the show and the movies, he had already been on the fashion radar for a very long time. By then, he had already become a very known fashion designer. He was very established within the industry, and you may know that he has been friends with a lot of celebrities, people from pop culture, and also in fashion. Probably one of his most famous friends in fashion is Anna Wintour. Needless to say, she also heavily promoted his shoes. If you zoom in on some of the pictures, you may realize that she often wears the same type of shoe. It's this sandal stiletto heel in a nude color, and this is actually a custom Manolo Blahnik shoe for her. He actually has a model of her feet, but actually we need to go back even further, because Manolo Blahnik met Diana Vreeland in 1969. She was then the head of the Costume Institute. You also know her because she was the editor-in-chief of American Vogue. She looked at his sketches and she said, you need to focus on designing shoes, and this is actually what he did. And since his childhood, Manolo Blahnik was obsessed with shoes. I highly recommend to watch the documentary from 2017, which is called The Boy Who Made Shoes for Lizard. As a side note here, this video is non-sponsored. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. And now you will hear this title and think, The Boy Who Made Shoes for Lizards, what is this? This actually relates to his childhood, because Manolo Blahnik was born in 1942. He grew up on the Canary Islands, and his parents owned a banana plantation. His father was Czech and his mother had a Spanish background, and he played a lot on the plantation in the garden. And while other children were running around, riding their bicycles, doing other things, the small Manolo Blahnik was actually making shoes from aluminium wrappers for the lizards that were running around on the plantation. And even though it took him, of course, much longer to become a shoe designer, I think this is such a beautiful story. And this is one of the beautiful stories that are told in this documentary. And when you watch it, and also when you watch interviews with Manolo Blahnik himself, you will see that he is not only very educated, very interested in art, he's also a very special character. He's very funny. So I really recommend watching either the documentary or some interviews with him. And it happens so often, parents have a certain vision for their children and then they end up doing something completely different. Initially, his parents wanted him to become a diplomat. So after boarding school in Switzerland, he enrolled in university to study law and politics, which is this typical base course if you want to become a diplomat, but very soon he realized it was not for him and he switched to architecture and literature and graduated in these courses. In 1965, Manolo Blahnik moved to Paris. He studied art at the École des Beaux-Arts and also stage design at the Louvre Art School. So you can see he didn't really study to become a shoe designer, and this is something that I find so interesting. Very often we look at successful career paths and people started out at a very different place where they actually ended up. So most careers are actually not linear, I would say, and I think he's a very interesting example also for this. And in 1969 he met Diana Vreeland. He was actually introduced to her through his friend Paloma Picasso, and he had some sketches for Midsummer Night's Dream when he designed a stage costume. And Diana Vreeland saw the sketches, and then she spotted a stiletto high heel with ivy and cherries. And then she immediately said he needs to focus on shoes. And she actually said, I quote, "Young man, stick to the extremities and make shoes." And this is exactly what he did. And let's quickly come back to his career path. I said before that his career path was actually not linear. It also means that he actually never formally trained as a shoe designer, But he was very, very interested, and he tried to learn as much about shoemaking as he could. This also meant that he went to Italy. He not only talked to the craftspeople, he also watched them closely, and he wanted to learn on the job. In 1969, he moved away from Paris and moved to London. In an interview, I read that he said he wanted to improve his English skills. I don't know if this was the only motivation, but it was a very good move for him, because in London he started to design for designers, and his first runway shoe was released 2 years later in 1971, and it was for none other than Ossie Clark. And Ossie Clark was not the only designer that he worked with. He also designed shoes for Sandra Rhodes, for example, and he also designed for Zapata. And this is actually a company that Manolo Blahnik soon purchased himself. And then he also opened his own boutique in the early 1970s in Old Church Street in Chelsea in London. And Manolo Blahnik became known for not being too interested in fashion trends. And this is actually something that is still very much part of his brand DNA and also his design aesthetics. He always said he was not very much interested in these short-term fashion trends, and actually this is something that I appreciate about his designs, because I find the shoes very timeless. And this is also something that spoke for him in the 1970s. When we look at the shoes from the time, you had wedge heels, you had the platform shoes, and this was something where Manolo Blahnik said, I'm not interested in this, this is not elegant for me. He focused on the stiletto heel, which would later actually make him famous. The things that also helped him a lot was his circle of friends, because this circle spanned across industries, from fashion to art to pop culture, and these friends shopped at his store. So there was Bianca Jagger, Rupert Everett, the artist David Hockney, and also Anna Wintour, who I mentioned before. And also these friends would then help him to become known overseas, because in the 1980s he opened his store in New York. And if we apply the terminology of today, we could say that Manolo Blahnik, together with his friends, managed to kind of create a hype around his shoes, because there's a very famous picture of Bianca Jagger. This picture is still famous until today. She was at Studio 54 riding on a white horse. She wore a Halston dress and Manolo Blahnik shoes. So everybody was talking about this, and I find this very interesting, because today most people think, oh, Sex and the City made him famous. In a way, yes, it did, but it was just another boost in his career, because he had already been very known before that. Needless to say, it's the power of TV, it's the power of Hollywood global movies. Of course, this put him into another strata, we could say. And let's go back to the friendship with Anna Wintour, because probably she also had a big impact on his career. Similar to Manolo Blahnik, she also moved to New York in the 1970s and established herself in the fashion industry and joined Vogue. And she probably also introduced him to many people in the fashion industry and also in pop culture. And soon he designed for the big American names Oscar de la Renta and Calvin Klein. And in 1990 he received an award by the CFDA. He also received an award by the British Fashion Council as the Accessory Designer of the Year. And these are just two of many, many awards that Manolo Blahnik has received. He was also awarded to be an honorary commander of the British Empire by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And you can see all of this on his website. You can also see the movies that he was involved with, and it's very interesting. You will see that on his About page, they talk about the collaboration with Sofia Coppola for the Marie Antoinette movie, but there's actually no word about Sex and the City. I would be very interested in the reason for that, because as I said before, so many people associate him with Sex and the City, and then there's not a single word about this in his About page. Maybe this is a coincidence, or maybe there's more about that. Maybe you know more, let me know in the comments below. But speaking about Sex and the City, I found an interview where Manolo Blahnik talked about the show and the Hangisi stiletto heel in particular. According to him, this relationship had grown organically. Candice Bushnell and also Patricia Fields, the costume designer, really liked his shoes, and they had been featured on the show already several times. And then it just came naturally that they also picked a shoe for this show. I think nobody really knew what hype would be created with this scene. Maybe some people anticipated it, but I don't think that anybody could have anticipated a hype that has now been lasting almost 20 years. Now let's talk about this famous Hang Easy shoe. I personally really like Manolo Blahnik's designs. I think they are beautiful, they are amazing shoes. As I said before, this is a non-sponsored video. What I really appreciate about him is not only his classic and timeless approach. I think he's very innovative, and also when you watch the documentary you will see that he is still very much involved in the business. He even says he wants to keep working. Designing shoes is more to him than just a mere profession. He really identifies with this, and he is also in the factory designing and checking the quality control. I think this is more than just a mere marketing strategy. I think when you listen to the interviews it comes across as very genuine. Maybe I'm mistaken, but this is just my personal view, and this is something that I really appreciate about him as a person and as a designer. Another thing that speaks for his shoes is that they are actually really comfortable. They are high heels, but you can actually walk with them, so the construction of his shoes is very good. So this is just my personal opinion, and I have another personal opinion. I have to admit here that the Hangisi is actually not my most favorite design by Manolo Blahnik. I can't really say why. Maybe it is because I've seen it too much, because this shoe is basically everywhere. It has also been copied a lot. This is not Manolo Blahnik's fault, but maybe it's just too much out there. Maybe it's also the crystal buckle, because I actually like glitter and glamour and crystals, but something is not working for me. But what I actually did like in the movie, or when this blue version of the shoe was featured, I really liked this very intense electric blue. That was quite nice. This shoe launched in 2008, and I have to admit I actually don't know how to say it correctly. I did some research online, and I think most people use this English way of saying it. They say Hangisi. For some reason, I think a lot of people don't know how to say it correctly. I found interviews by Manolo Blahnik where he said that this term is actually Turkish. Then you would say Hangisi, I hope I said this correctly, and this then means which or which one. I did not find much information why he chose this particular name or how he came across this term. There are interviews where he said that he found that it sounded very romantic, but I could not find more information about the reason for the choice, or also how he came across this word. Was it because he traveled to Turkey, or did he read about it? I don't know, maybe you know more, then let me know in the comments below. But let's come back to this Turkish meaning, which or which one. Even if it was not intentional, I find it quite opposite looking at it today, because this shoe has become so famous. It has been launched in over 100 colors, in different materials, with different heights of the stiletto heel, even in flats. So if we think about how many designs are out there of this particular Hangisi design, then it's actually quite fitting that the meaning could be which or which one, even if it was not intentional. Let's look closer at the design. There are quite a few, I would say, urban legends out there what may have inspired him. It's also interesting when you read the different articles, they all seem to tell each other the same thing. This is a personal problem that I have when I do the research for these videos and my articles. I found some information on the design on the Manolo Blahnik website, on the product page of the Hangisi shoe. And there they say that Manolo Blahnik was inspired to make such a buckle because he came across these buckle designs in Italy. But there's not more information about that. And also, according to the website, he was inspired for this design by Napoleon I, his first wife Josephine, and also his sister Pauline. And now, if you have watched my other videos, for example about the Gucci Flora scarf or the Versace Medusa logo, you know what is coming. The art historian did some research. I looked at paintings of these three people, and at first I was like, Napoleon I and a crystal buckle, was he wearing shoes with such a buckle? But it actually goes further than that. Think about it. When you think about Napoleon I, probably these monumental paintings about him come to mind. He was very often featured with this golden laurel leaf crown. And he was very much into jewelry, even as a man. Also, one reason could be the symbolism, the meaning of all of these pieces that he not only wore himself, but also the pieces he had created for others, especially his wives. And very often Napoleon is referred to as somebody who created a trend for tiaras again at the time. And in this context of this crystal buckle of the Hangisi shoe, I would like to refer to one tiara design in particular, and this is the ears of wheat tiara. It's a very famous design. Napoleon commissioned it in 1811 for his wife Josephine. It's made of diamonds, 66 carats. It was made by the House of Niton, by François Regnault Niton, later the House of Chaumet, and they were official suppliers to the court. I think there might be multiple designs or versions of this ears of wheat tiara, because I saw some videos with certain designs, and then I also found one ears of wheat tiara on the website of the auction house Christie's. In 2021 there was an auction where they sold one of these ears of wheat tiaras, and the provenance was actually Pauline Bonaparte, the sister of Napoleon. And provenance means that she owned this tiara, and it looks a bit different, so I think that's why there were multiple interpretations of these tiaras. Just an interesting detail, it's not that important for the Hangisi shoe, but I saw that this tiara was sold for 810,000 Swiss francs at the time, and if we convert this today, it would be 930,000 US dollars. Today we would say it was a lot of bling, 66 carats, diamonds, but actually it was not only the adornment or showing that you can have these diamonds. Of course, this was one aspect, but another aspect was also the symbolism, the meaning of it. Because when you look at the ears of wheat, they stand for prosperity, generosity, rebirth. So these are values that they probably wanted to transport to the people, but not only these really nice meanings or morally positive meanings, it also shows something else, because this also meant sovereignty and power. And this is something, when you think about Napoleon crowning himself as King of France and all these things, it also makes sense in this context. And these pieces of jewelry were also featured in paintings of Napoleon, Josephine, Pauline, other members of the family. And of course, Manolo Blahnik, with his background in art and also living in Paris, he came across these paintings for sure. So I'm actually not surprised about this source of inspiration. But maybe Manolo Blahnik wanted to achieve something else with this shoe. This is my personal interpretation here, but maybe there's something to it. Think about it. Napoleon wanted to kind of not show off, but I think he just loved the diamonds and show that he had them. Of course, in his case, we are talking about one piece with 66 carats of diamonds. This is something quite unattainable. And maybe Manolo Blahnik wanted to give us something attainable, but still aspirational at the same time, because this shoe is not cheap. It retails over 1,000 US dollars. But maybe we can do the same as what Napoleon did. We can appreciate the crystals and kind of show off a bit if somebody wants to do that. But in our case, the crystals are not diamonds, definitely not 66 carats. They are Swarovski crystals, and I read somewhere that one buckle involves 144 separate Swarovski crystals. When you search a bit for this Hangisi shoe, you find that most articles refer to these two sources of inspiration. One is this buckle that he discovered in Italy. The second one is this inspiration he took from Napoleon and his family. These are legitimate arguments because they are also on the website, but I found one other interview with Manolo Blahnik himself, which I found really interesting because it gives another view on this shoe. And in this interview, he said that he went to an exhibition by the Italian painter Giovanni Boldini, and he painted society ladies in the late 19th and early 20th century. And Manolo Blahnik discovered some buckles or details on the shoes that inspired him for his Hangisi shoe design. And another source of inspiration that he gave in that interview was that he also saw the paintings by Eugène Delacroix, in particular the women of Algiers. And when you zoom in, you see these North African style slippers, very often called babouche slippers. And he said also these shoes inspired him for his Hangisi design. He also made a comment in that interview about the setting of that painting and also the energy of that painting. I'm not going to talk about this on YouTube. I will have it in my article on thepinklookbook.com if you want to read more about this without me getting punished by the YouTube algorithm. When I had the idea of the video, I was not sure if I actually wanted to do it in the end, because in the beginning I only found the superficial information about the shoe, that it was featured in Sex and the City. But the more I read about the shoe and also the videos that I watched, I realized again how much effort, how much thought goes into certain designs, and we don't even question it, we don't even think about this. Sometimes we look at fashion and think it's very superficial. In the case of this shoe in Sex and the City, we could say, oh, this was superficial, the shoe was placed in the show and became a hype. But to design this shoe, to come up with this particular shoe design, a lot of thought went into this, a lot of art also obviously influenced it, no matter which source of inspiration was actually the one. But I found this really beautiful, very interesting, and it reminded me again to look behind that first image that we have of fashion and not dismiss it as something superficial. And I actually found another Hangisi design illustrating exactly that point that I just made. In 2018, Manolo Blahnik celebrated 10 years of the Hangisi design with a limited edition or a special collection called the Hangisi Cosmo. It was clearly New York inspired, it was the cosmopolitan glass, this was the inspiration for the print. So at first I dismissed it, I looked at it, oh of course 10 years anniversary of this Hangisi shoe, Sex and the City, New York. It's quite literal. But then I found an interview where Manolo Blahnik himself explained that yes, this was one source of inspiration, but the second source of inspiration was the Austrian artist Koloman Moser. And Koloman Moser was part of the Jugendstil, the Art Deco. He was also a member of the famous Wiener Secession, the Vienna Secession, and he was also a co-founder of the Wiener Werkstätte. And when you look at his prints and his artworks, you can see where Manolo Blahnik may have gotten his inspiration from, this repeating of a very graphic pattern. Maybe we can even relate this to the church in Steinhof in Vienna, where I found these colorful glass windows, stained glass windows, also designed by Koloman Moser. So maybe this is a link, and I actually found this quite nice. And as I said before, I'm actually not a fan of the Hangisi design itself, but then when I read about the source of inspiration, the link to Austria, to Vienna, to Koloman Moser, I thought to myself, maybe I have to make an exception. Maybe this is one of the Hangisi designs that I like. Maybe I can find it even on a vintage platform, because I really like the thought that went into all of these designs. Maybe the media then focus more on the obvious, because probably you sell this shoe because it's linked to Sex and the City and not to an artist who lived in Vienna over 100 years ago. I understand this, but for me as a fashion and arts nerd, we could say this is a very, very nice detail. And now what about you? Do you own this shoe? What do you think about the design? Do you like it? Or do you also say you have seen it too much, it's not really your style? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that like button, and if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to my channel. If you want to read more about fashion, you can also head over to my website, thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you liked this video, I recommend one of my other videos where I talk about the Cartier Trinity design. It's a very famous design, and similar to the Hangisi shoe, the inspiration for it came from the arts, and it is also closely linked to artists. So maybe this is something that you would like to watch. Thank you very much for joining me in this video, and see you in the next one.